The old house didn't sound the same anymore. When Ethan stepped inside for the first time in nearly 20 years, the air felt heavier, still soaked with the smell of dust and rain. Every step on the warped floorboards echoed through the empty rooms like the place was breathing again after a long sleep. He had promised himself he wouldn't stay long. Just enough time to pack what was left of his father's things, maybe call the realtor tomorrow, and leave the ghosts of his childhood behind. But as he moved through the hall, memories trailed behind him like shadows. His mother's laughter, his father's quiet hum in the evenings, the muffled arguments he used to pretend he didn't hear. Ethan reached his old bedroom at the end of the hall. The door creaked the same way it always had, high-pitched, familiar, unsettling. The room looked smaller than he remembered. The wallpaper had peeled in long, curling strips, and dust covered everything except the middle of the floor, where a faint outline of a rug used to be. He dropped to one knee, running a hand across the exposed boards. Something felt off, a soft vibration beneath his fingers, like the wood wasn't sitting flush with the rest. He pressed down. It gave slightly and then, click. A small square lifted just enough to reveal a hollow space beneath. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of old newspaper, was a brass key. Small, perfectly polished, too new to have been sitting there for decades. Ethan turned it over in his palm. The head of the key had faint scratches, letters carved by hand, B2. He frowned. There was only one basement in the house. His father had built it himself. So what did B2 mean? As he stood, the house groaned again. A window rattled somewhere down the hall. He felt a chill crawl up his arms. Maybe it was just the wind, or maybe the place didn't like being disturbed. He pocketed the key and grabbed the flashlight from his bag. The basement door was still at the end of the kitchen, behind the refrigerator. He hadn't opened it since he was 10, back when his father used to warn him, never go down there alone. The door was stiff but gave way with a slow, drawn-out creak. The smell hit him first, earth, iron, mildew. His light flickered across concrete walls and rows of old tools. Everything looked exactly how he remembered, except for one thing. There were deep scrape marks on the floor. They led from the old workbench across to the far wall, jagged, deliberate. Like something heavy had been moved again and again. Ethan followed the marks until the beam of light revealed a thin crack running down the center of the concrete wall. He pressed his hand against it. Cold air seeped through, smelling faintly of dirt and something else, something older. He leaned closer, his breath misting against the surface. The wall wasn't just cracked. It sounded hollow. For a long moment, he just stood there, key in hand, heart pounding, listening to the silence of the house he thought he knew. Then he whispered, almost to himself, B2. And somewhere deep behind that wall, something answered. A faint tap. Then another. Slow. Rhythmic. He stumbled backward, the key slipping from his hand and clattering onto the floor. When he looked down to pick it up, he noticed something he hadn't before, a faint set of footprints, smaller than his, leading away from where he stood and stopping right beside him. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat on the couch in the living room, staring at the flashlight on the table, the brass key beside it catching what little moonlight came through the window. The sound, that tapping, kept replaying in his mind. It hadn't been a mouse. It hadn't been the pipes. It had been too deliberate, too steady, like someone answering him. By morning, the house was still silent, but something about it felt wrong. It was as if the walls had shifted in their sleep. The air was thicker, colder. He could hear faint creaks from the basement below, like the house itself was restless. He tried to shake it off, making coffee in the same chipped mug his father used to use. The kitchen hadn't changed much, but he noticed details now, scratches near the doorframe, a faint outline of something once hung there. He had the uneasy sense that the place was watching him back. By noon, he found himself back at the basement door. The memory of those footprints still gnawed at him. He couldn't explain them. They were too small, too precise, and they had stopped right next to him, as if whoever made them had been standing there, watching. He turned on the flashlight and went down the steps. Dust particles swirled through the beam. The scrape marks on the floor were still there, but the wall at the end, the one with the thin crack, looked different. He froze halfway across the room. The crack had widened. Yesterday, It had been no thicker than a pencil line. Now, it was nearly an inch wide from floor to waist height. Fresh dust lay at the base, scattered unevenly, like the wall had been pushed from the other side. Ethan's mouth went dry. "No way," he whispered. He ran his hand along the edges. The concrete was cool but brittle, as if it had been chipping for days. He leaned closer, pressing his ear to it. For a second, all he heard was his own breathing. Then, faintly, a dragging sound, like something scraping across the floor on the other side. He jerked back. The light flickered once, then steadied. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He picked up the brass key from his pocket and studied it again. B2. What if it wasn't a label, but a location? His father's basement wasn't the only part of this property. The old blueprint he'd found years ago mentioned something strange. Section B. His father had called it a root cellar. But Ethan remembered that part of the foundation had always been sealed off. He stepped closer to the wall again. The sound had stopped, replaced by silence so deep it made his skin prickle. Then suddenly, the floor beneath him shifted slightly. He stepped back, shining the light downward. One of the boards near the base of the wall had sunk just a fraction of an inch. He pressed his foot down again. Movement. The wall didn't crumble or break. It slid. A thin vertical section began to shift sideways, slow and deliberate, revealing a narrow gap just wide enough for someone to slip through. A rush of cold air spilled out, carrying the scent of dirt and rusted metal. Ethan's light trembled as he raised it. Beyond the opening was a narrow stairwell leading down, deeper than the basement itself. He hesitated, every instinct screaming to stop. But then he heard it again, faint, echoing from below. A voice, whispering his name. "Ethan." He dropped the key in shock. It hit the floor, ringing against the concrete, and rolled toward the dark opening, disappearing down the steps. He swallowed hard, his breath shaking. "Dad?" he called softly. No answer. Just silence. Then, a moment later, one single knock from below. The key's metallic clink still echoed in Ethan's ears as it vanished down the dark stairwell. For a moment, he stood frozen at the edge of the hidden opening, staring into the void below. The beam of his flashlight trembled in his grip, scattering across the narrow steps that seemed older than the house itself, rough, uneven, carved from stone. He took a breath and descended. Each step groaned beneath his weight, as if protesting his presence. The air grew colder, damp, carrying a faint metallic tang, blood, or rust. The walls on either side were slick with condensation, and somewhere below, water dripped in a slow, steady rhythm. When he reached the bottom, his light revealed a small underground chamber, roughly square, maybe 10 feet wide. The air was thick and stale, as though sealed for decades. Old shelves lined the far wall, stacked with boxes covered in a film of dust and cobwebs. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, the wire vanishing upward into darkness. Ethan clicked the switch near the stairs. Nothing. The power hadn't reached here in years. He moved carefully, brushing aside hanging cobwebs. The first box he opened contained nothing but torn paper and moldy rags. The second, photographs. Dozens of them. Some faded to yellow, others stuck together from age. He separated one carefully. It showed a woman standing beside a man on the front porch of this very house. His father. But the woman wasn't his mother. He flipped through more. The same woman appeared in several. Smiling. Sometimes holding a small boy with dark hair. Ethan felt a chill crawl up his spine. The boy looked like him. He set the photo aside, heart pounding, and turned toward the far wall. Something about it felt wrong. The bricks near the corner were cleaner, newer. He ran his hand across them, smooth, cool. A faint vibration pulsed beneath his palm, almost like a heartbeat. He pressed harder. The wall gave a soft, hollow sound. There was space behind it. Using an old crowbar from one of the boxes, Ethan wedged it into the crack and pulled. The brick shifted, releasing a puff of dust. He widened the gap, prying one brick free, then another. Behind the wall was a small compartment, and inside, an old wooden chest. He dragged it out into the light. The lock had rusted shut. He tried to pry it open, but the metal refused to give. Then he noticed, etched into the lid, a faint engraving, B2. His stomach dropped. The one that had fallen down here. He turned his light toward the steps. The key lay near the base, as if deliberately placed there. He bent down slowly, picked it up, and fitted it into the chest lock. It turned with a soft click, the sound sharp and final. Inside were objects wrapped in old fabric, and a journal. Its cover was cracked leather, his father's initials burned into the front. Ethan flipped it open, his breath catching at the first line written inside. If you are reading this, the house has already chosen you. He felt the room tilt. The air grew heavier, pressing in from all sides. A sound rose behind him, a faint scraping, like nails on stone. Ethan turned, raising his flashlight. The wall he'd broken open was moving, closing slowly, brick by brick. Ethan's trembling hands brushed the dust off the cracked leather cover. The diary felt heavy, almost alive, as if the air around it pulsed with something ancient. His father's initials, J.R., were burned into the surface, but when he flipped to the first page, the handwriting wasn't his father's. It was unfamiliar, sharper, rushed, almost frantic. The first line stared back at him like a warning. The boy in the house is not mine. Ethan froze. The candlelight flickered beside him, casting shadows that crawled along the basement walls. He turned another page. The writing grew messier, darker, the words pressing deep into the paper as if carved in desperation. He speaks to the walls when he thinks I'm not listening. Says the voices know where the other room is. Says the key isn't lost, it's waiting. His pulse thundered in his ears. He remembered being a child, whispering to the floorboards of his room, hearing something faint answer back. His mother used to tell him it was just the wind. He turned another page. Dates were scrawled in the margins, years before Ethan was even born. Yet they mentioned him by name. Ethan woke again last night. Said the woman was standing in the hallway. Said she told him to dig. He dropped the book, stumbling back. The shadows seemed to shift with him, as though listening. When he picked the diary up again, the next few pages were torn. The writing resumed later, a different tone now, colder, resigned. The door below must never open. The child doesn't know what he carries. Ethan read that line over and over. What he carries. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady his breathing. His father had hidden this place for a reason. But if this wasn't his father's handwriting, whose was it? A faint thump echoed above him, from the floorboards of the house above. Ethan looked up, flashlight trembling. Another thump, closer this time. Then silence. He climbed the stairs cautiously, each creak louder than the last. When he reached the top, the living room looked exactly as he'd left it, except for one thing. The photograph on the mantel, the one of his parents on their wedding day, was turned backward. Ethan's mouth went dry. He approached it slowly and flipped it around. The image was the same, except now, a faint outline of a woman stood behind his mother, her face blurred, her hand resting on his mother's shoulder. His flashlight flickered. The bulb in the ceiling dimmed, buzzed, then went out completely. In the brief darkness, he heard it, a whisper, faint and close. You shouldn't have read it. The light snapped back on. The room was empty. Ethan spun around, heart pounding. The diary lay open on the coffee table where he had set it down, though he didn't remember moving it there. The page had changed again. A new entry. Fresh ink. He found the room. The house remembers him. Ethan staggered back. His breath fogged in the air. The basement door creaked behind him, slowly opening by itself. He stared into the blackness below, the beam of his flashlight trembling. The air smelled of earth and something old, something wet. He took one hesitant step forward, then another. From somewhere in the dark, a voice whispered his name. Not from behind him. Not from the basement. From inside the walls. Ethan froze halfway down the steps. The voice came again, muffled but clear, calling his name. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was calm. Familiar. Come back down here. The basement door swung wider, its hinges groaning like something exhaling. The air below shimmered faintly, as if heat were rising from the cold stone. He wanted to believe it was just his imagination, a trick of his exhausted mind, but every instinct told him otherwise. He swallowed hard and descended the last few steps. The flashlight flickered as he reached the bottom. The diary still lay open on the table, but the words had changed again. He's listening now. Ethan's chest tightened. Who's there? He called, voice echoing off the damp walls. Silence. Then, a faint shuffle from behind the old wooden door at the far end of the room. The same door he'd never been able to open as a kid. The same one his father always told him didn't lead anywhere. Now, something behind it was breathing. He stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of wet wood and something metallic. The breathing stopped, replaced by a soft humming. The tune. It was the lullaby his mother used to sing. Ethan's throat tightened. Mom? He whispered, though he knew it couldn't be. She'd been gone for years. The tune faded. Then the voice, clearer now, from just inches behind the door. You shouldn't have come back. Ethan stumbled back, hitting the table behind him. The flashlight clattered to the floor, spinning light across the walls. For a moment, he thought he saw movement. A shadow pressed against the crack at the bottom of the door. Human-shaped. The humming began again, slower this time, like it was being played through old tape. He crouched, reaching for the flashlight, but froze when a hand appeared under the door. Fingernails broken. He bolted up the stairs, but halfway up, the door at the top slammed shut on its own. The house shuddered. From below, the voice changed, deeper now, no longer human. Ethan. He pressed his back against the wall, breathing fast, heart hammering in his chest. The door downstairs rattled violently, shaking in its frame. Then, silence. The quiet was worse. It was as if the whole house held its breath with him. Slowly, Ethan descended again. The door had stopped shaking. The humming had stopped. Only the faint sound of dripping water filled the basement. He bent down, shining the flashlight across the floor. The hand was gone. But something had been left in its place. A small silver key, its handle carved with the initials JR. Ethan reached for it, his fingers trembling. The metal was ice cold. As soon as he picked it up, the light flickered, and the diary's pages turned on their own. One line stood out in bold ink. The key opens what was never meant to be found. Ethan looked up toward the dark door. His reflection stared back at him in the metal handle, except it wasn't his reflection. The face staring back was smiling. The next morning, sunlight barely reached through the dusty windows. Ethan hadn't slept. The key from the basement sat on the table in front of him, its metallic sheen dulled by grime and time. He'd washed his hands twice, yet he could still feel its coldness pressed into his skin. He needed answers. And there was only one place left to look, the town archives. The old police station stood at the edge of town, half forgotten like everything else from his childhood. He hadn't been there since the day his parents died. As he pushed through the glass doors, the same sterile smell of paper and dust greeted him, triggering a rush of memories he wished would stay buried. A gray-haired clerk looked up from her desk. "Help you with something?" "I need a police report," Ethan said, trying to sound casual. "From 19 years ago. The fire at 32 Maple Street." Her expression shifted. "That old case?" She frowned and tapped at her computer. "What's your name?" "Ethan Rains." Her fingers froze mid-typing. A long silence followed. Then, without meeting his eyes, she muttered, "We don't keep those records anymore." "That's not possible," he said, leaning forward. "Every report gets archived." She hesitated, glancing toward the hallway behind her. Some files were destroyed. Destroyed? After the basement flood 10 years ago. Ethan's pulse quickened. Was it really a flood? Her eyes flicked up to his, weary, uncertain. "You shouldn't go digging into that. Some things are better left." He turned away before she could finish. Something about her tone, rehearsed, careful, didn't sit right. He followed the hallway she'd looked toward. The records room was locked behind a glass door, a red light glowing over the handle. Authorized personnel only. He pressed his face against the glass. Rows of cabinets lined the walls, tagged by year. But where 2006 should have been, there was only a gap, a clean, empty space. He knocked on the glass softly. Nothing. Then again harder. A faint echo replied. 3 knocks. Slow. From inside the room. Ethan froze. He tried the handle again. It didn't budge. Behind him, the fluorescent lights flickered. The hallway darkened for a split second, and when they came back on, there was something on the other side of the glass. A man. He was standing perfectly still, face obscured by shadow. Ethan stepped closer, breath catching. The man lifted his hand, pressing it against the glass, palm to palm. A jolt ran through Ethan's chest. His heart stopped when he saw the small silver key hanging from the man's wrist on a chain. The same one that was now missing from Ethan's pocket. He stumbled back. The lights flickered again, and the man was gone. Ethan burst out of the station, gasping for air. The town outside looked different, emptier somehow. When he finally dared to look at his phone, a new voicemail waited, time-stamped from 10 minutes ago. He pressed play. Static. Then a whisper. You don't need the report, Ethan. You wrote it. His blood ran cold. He replayed it, but this time, the message was gone. Deleted on its own. As he stared at the blank screen, the reflection in the glass door behind him began to move, even though he hadn't. Ethan drove home with the voicemail still echoing in his head. You wrote it. The words had lodged themselves deep inside him like splinters. He didn't remember ever writing a police report, but something about the way the voice said it made him question everything. The old house loomed ahead, darker than before, as if it too knew what he'd discovered. The key he thought he'd lost was lying neatly on his doorstep when he arrived. Polished. Waiting. He picked it up with trembling fingers and went inside. The silence was heavy, charged, the kind of quiet that felt alive. On the table sat his father's old tape recorder. It hadn't worked in years. But now, the red light was blinking. Ethan froze. He didn't touch it. Not at first. He just watched as the tape inside slowly rewound on its own, gears clicking softly in the dark. Finally, the motion stopped. The play button clicked, by itself. A burst of static filled the room, followed by a man's voice. Familiar. Ethan, if you're hearing this, it means you've found it. He stumbled back, knocking into a chair. His pulse roared in his ears. That voice, it was his father's. I didn't want you to go down there, the recording continued. I tried to seal it away, but you were always too curious. You wouldn't understand, not then. But maybe you can now. Ethan whispered into the air, Dad? The tape hissed as if in response. Then the voice returned, lower, broken. They told me to burn it. To bury everything. But I couldn't. Not after what I saw. It wasn't a basement, Ethan. It was a door. And something was on the other side. Ethan's skin prickled. His mind flashed back to the shifting wall, the cold air that seemed to breathe from below. The voice cracked again. If you hear the knocking, don't answer it. Promise me. It remembers. The tape cut off. Ethan stood frozen in the dim light. Then, a soft mechanical click. The recorder began rewinding again. But this time, the play button didn't wait for him. It pressed itself. Static. A new voice. It wasn't his father's. It was lower, distorted, but eerily similar to his own. Why didn't you listen, Ethan? The voice whispered. He felt the air around him shift. The lights dimmed. Somewhere deep in the floorboards, something groaned, like the house itself had taken a breath. The tape continued. You wrote the report. You locked the door. You left them there. His chest tightened. Who? He said aloud. No response. Just static and a faint tapping sound, steady, rhythmic. It wasn't coming from the recorder anymore. It was coming from beneath the floor. He slowly crouched, pressing his ear to the wooden boards. Then a pause, followed by a whisper so faint he almost didn't catch it. Let us out. Ethan jumped back, heart hammering. The tape recorder whirred one last time, and the voice, his voice, said something final, something cold. You're not supposed to be here anymore. The light flickered, and the key he'd left on the table slid across the wood on its own, stopping right above the basement door. Ethan stared at it, breath shallow. Then, from below, the knocking started again. Louder this time. Relentless. The knocking wouldn't stop. Each thud shook the air, steady and patient, as if whoever or whatever was below knew Ethan would eventually give in. He stood frozen, staring at the key that had slid itself toward the basement door. His reflection trembled in the brass handle. For a long time, he didn't move. Then, with a trembling breath, he reached out. The metal was warm, like someone had just held it. When the lock clicked open, the knocking stopped. Silence swallowed the house. Ethan waited. Nothing. No whisper, no shift in the air. He stepped down the creaking stairs, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the dust, illuminating old furniture draped in sheets, boxes stacked high, and cobwebs like torn curtains. It was the same basement he remembered, yet wrong. The air was thicker. He could feel the walls breathing. He aimed the flashlight toward the far corner, and froze. The wall was different now. The boards that once sealed it were pulled apart, nails scattered on the floor. Behind them, a narrow opening yawned in the darkness, a space that hadn't been there before. Ethan whispered, "This isn't possible." Something moved inside the gap. Not fast, not human. Slow, deliberate. He backed away, but his heel hit a box. It toppled, spilling out old photographs and folded papers. One landed face up at his feet. It was a photo of him, but younger, maybe 8 years old. His father stood beside him, smiling stiffly. Behind them, the wall in the picture was the same one now open before him. He knelt, picking up another paper, a police report. The same one he'd seen in the file room. But this one had something added at the bottom, scrawled in his father's handwriting. Containment failed. The flashlight flickered. He looked up. A shape was standing in the opening. At first, it looked like a shadow. Then it shifted, shoulders, arms, a head tilting slightly as if curious. Its face was pale, wrong, the features too smooth. "Dad," Ethan whispered. The shape stepped closer. The floor creaked beneath it. Its voice came softly, like an echo replaying from somewhere far away. "You shouldn't have come back." Ethan stumbled back toward the stairs, but the door above him slammed shut. Darkness swallowed the room. He fumbled with the flashlight. Nothing. Then a faint light appeared behind him. The shape was holding something. A tape recorder, the same one from his table. It clicked. Static filled the room. Then came a voice, his own. "They told me not to open it," the recording said. "But I did. And now, I can't remember which side I'm on." Ethan's breath hitched. "What are you?" he whispered into the dark. The figure stepped closer until its face was only inches from his. Its skin shimmered like reflection on glass. It smiled. His smile. "You already know," it said. And with that, it reached forward and pressed the flashlight switch. The beam flared to life, revealing dozens of photographs covering the far wall. Every one of them was of Ethan. But in each, he was older, standing closer to the camera, as if someone had been taking them through the years. Watching him. Behind him, the shape whispered, "You never left." The basement light above flickered on for just a second, and he saw it clearly now. The open space wasn't just another room. It was a mirror of his own basement. Same furniture, same boxes, except in that one, he was the shadow. The light blinked out again. And when it did, there was no one left standing in the real basement at all.